Today I'm going to show you how to create a master detail report. That is a master report where you have information related to one file that points to many records in a subfile. We'll create two reports. We'll create a form that will display the report. I'll show you how to do all the setups so that you can do a one-to-many reporting. One record in the header, many records in the sub-report. We'll start by creating a new project. We will call this project Master Detail. It'll be a Windows Forms application. We'll rename that to Master Detail. If I can spell right, Master Detail. We'll click OK. Now what's happening right now is Visual Studio is creating the project and setting us up for a single form. This form will be the form that we will use to create the report. Now I'm going to make it a little bit larger, but I'm also going to save the project at this point so that we can do our saves. You'll see that I save throughout the project. So the very first thing that we are going to want to do after we've created the form in the project is to add the reference to the Microsoft Windows Reports DLLs. So we'll right click on Master Detail, we'll click on Add Reference, we'll go to the Browse section and we'll go to C. Typically it's in Program Files. It's in Microsoft Visual Studio. I'm using Visual Studio 10. We then add the reporting module. That's this one. And click OK. Now it will show us three of them. We're not doing a web forms. We're only doing a Windows form, but we do need the common, and holding Control key down and clicking on Win Forms, that will then add those two DLLs to our project. The next thing that we're going to want to do is now to create a data set. So I'm going to start over here on the data sources, click on that, we'll click Database, we'll click Next, Data Set, and Next. Now I've loaded the Northwind database into my SQL Express version. That contains a lot of orders, it contains a lot of other files, but the key here is that we have an orders header file and we have an orders detail file. I've already set up a connection string to the Northwind database, but you could do that by clicking New Connection. You would put in your SQL Server name here. In my case, it would be SQL Server, or SQL Express rather, SQL Express. And notice that as soon as I start typing, that the select or enter a database name comes up, and I can click the down arrow here. Now in some cases you are going to have to show that it's the entire path to the SQL Express, so you might have to put the server name in there. In my case it would be my desktop name. But once that comes up, and we will have to indeed put in and again we'll do a refresh on that and click on our select or enter a database name, and now we should see indeed there's the Northwind. And if you click OK, it will give you a connection. In my case, I've already got a new connection string, so I'm going to cancel out of this. I'm going to accept the connection, and I'm going to click Next. Notice that we have a connection string. That's fine. We don't really need to change that at this time. We'll click Next, at which point the Visual Studio goes out to the database and it reads all the tables, views, stored procedures, and functions. We're interested in the tables at this point. So we're going to click Tables, and notice that the tables are in alphabetical order, which puts order details ahead of orders. And that's how it's going to be throughout our project here. Orders will be the first table, order details will be the 0 table, or order details table 1, orders table 2. And the reason I say 0 and 1 is because in some cases you have to index starting at 0 rather than index starting at 1. I'm also going to change the Northwind dataset to orders dataset, and I'm going to click Finish. Now at this point we have a dataset with orders in it and we have order details in it. So let's go ahead and create a master report. Again, we will right click on Master Detail, we'll click Add, we'll click New Item. Now what you're going to want to do on our common templates is you're going to want to go to Reporting, and we're going to click on Report. I'm going to change the report name from Report 1 to Order Headers. and I'm going to click Add. Now at this point what we've got is basically a blank slate that we can work with on our report, our order headers report. But notice also that there's no report data. By the way, if you do not have this window showing up, this report data window, all you have to do is click View, and at the bottom of that you should see the report data. Click on that to show this window. Once you've got this window showing, you can click on New, and we're going to click on Data Set. Now, what we're going to do is we're not going to create a new data set. We're going to use an existing data set, but we want to make sure we understand what it is. So I'm going to change the name from Dataset 1 to Order Headers. Under Data Source, we're going to choose Orders Dataset, and now you see where Order Details comes ahead of Orders, so we pick Orders. That's all of our order header information. We click OK. And notice now that what we've got is we've got all of the fields in our order headers table right here. Even though the table name itself is called orders, we've named it order headers. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to add some fields to the report, but we need a container in which to do it. So I'm going to click on Toolbox, and in this case, because we want to have multiple pages for each report, for each order, we're going to use the list functionality. So I'm going to drag that over in here. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger because we're going to want some extra room in there. And then what I'm going to do is go back to the report data. And I'm only going to put a few fields in here because there's a much more complex situation where using the customer ID, we could go get the customer name and various things like that. But this demo is a pretty quick demo. You can do that on your own. So I'll start by dragging the order ID in, and all I did was left click that, drag it over. I'm going to put the customer ID in too, and I'm also going to put in the order date here. Okay. Now what that will give us is a quick little report that shows us what the order ID is, their customer ID, and their order date. At this point we could again save the project. And now what we can do is we can go and put this report into a report viewer where we can see it. So what I'm going to do is open up our Form 1 Designer again. Now what I'm going to do is go back to our tools. I'm going to go to the Reporting tab under our toolbox, and I'm going to pick Report Viewer, and I'm going to drag this in and use my mouse to make it about the size that I want it. And notice that as part of dropping that in, we get Report Viewer Tasks, and that's going to allow us to choose a report. Now the only report that we have in this project right now is the Order Headers report, but notice that we get Order Headers. We can then choose our data sources, which is not going to change, it's order headers. We click OK. We can rebind the data sources. And now what I'm going to do is dock this container, or dock it in the parent container. What that does is it makes sure that if we resize the form, that the report viewer resizes along with the form. So we click Dock in Parent, and then we'll close the report viewer tasks. And notice that if I resize the form, the report viewer inside the form resizes as well. Now at this point what we're going to do is we're going to save the project, and we're actually going to run this report. So we'll click on the Start Debugging, and while that's thinking, it's going to come up with a report form that indeed shows there's order number 10248, 10249. We scroll down, and notice that we may have multiple pages. In this case, we've got 10252, 10253. Looks like we've got a total of about 4 pages. And we'll go ahead and close that right now. There is some code behind that's been inserted by our progress so far, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But next what we want to do is we want to now create our detail report. So what we're going to do is right click on Master Detail. We're going to add, we're going to click a new item, and we're going to go back to Reporting. We'll go to Report, and now what we'll do is change that name from Report 1. We'll call it Order Details. And click Add. And again, notice that we've got this blank slate on which we can do all kinds of things. So what we're going to do first, though, is we are going to add a data set to the report. So again, we'll get to Report Data. We will click on New. We will click on Data Set. And again, notice that we're going to change this from Data Set 1, which is basically just a default, to Order Details. We're going to pick our data source, which again is our orders data set. And notice that default is the order details. That's fine. We'll click OK. And again, notice that what we've got here is our data fields coming out of the order details report. Next thing we're going to want to do is add a container to put our data fields into. So we'll click back on Toolbox, and I'm going to use a table. We'll click the table right here. The default size of the table is 3. I'm going to show you how you can add columns to this report. So we'll click back on Report Data. Now what we'll do is, just for the sake of consistency, I'm going to drop the order ID in here. We don't need to because we'll be creating a parameter later, but it does show you the relationship between the order details and the order header. I'll drop in the product ID here. I'll drop in the unit price here. Now what I'm going to do is right click on the table and do Insert Column to the right. And now what I'll do is I'll drag the quantity in here. Could you add another column that is unit price times quantity to give you a line total? Absolutely. You would just insert the column and right click on the column itself, click on expression, and you would then put in your expression that would multiply unit price times quantity. Again, for sake of simplicity, I'm going to leave that to you to test. Then what I'm going to do is resize our container here so that it's a little bit smaller. And I'll take this table, move it up just a bit. Here, move our container up, and this is more for aesthetics than anything else. Okay. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to somehow tie in this sub-report to our master report. And the field that we're going to want to do that on is order ID. So what we need to do is we need to click on parameters, right click, add parameter. And what we want to do is we want to call that order ID. You could call that anything you wanted to. All that's going to represent is the parameter itself. But notice as well, I'm going to allow blank values and I'm going to allow null values. In some cases, you may have an order header with no order details. That will allow the report to print the order header without detail and go on to the next order without giving you an error. So we'll click OK at this point in time. And now what we'll do is we'll save the project again to make sure that all of our changes every place has been done. We could at this point in time do a sample of the detail. And in fact, let's go ahead and do that. We'll click back on our Form 1. We will click into the report itself so that we can bring up the report viewer tasks. And we'll choose the report. Instead of order headers, we'll pick order details. Then what we'll do is choose our data sources. That's our order details. That's fine. Rebind the data sources. And now if you ran the project, save it, and ran the project, what you would get is a report showing you the order details. And there it is. There's all our orders. We've got 1024A, 10249, and so on like that. Now, even though we've created a parameter, we're not running it as a sub-report, so the sub-report is not looking for that parameter. So we'll go ahead and close that for right now. That comes in just a little bit later. Right now, the query that we have for the order details, does not demand a parameter. So that's, again, why we did not get an error, even though we set up a parameter in order details, this right here. So going back to our Form 1, we want to reset this form back to our order master report so we don't forget it later, our order headers. We will rebind the data sources and we'll close that and go back to order headers. Because in order headers, we are now going to drop in our sub-report and set it all up so that we pass the order ID into the sub-report. We set up the handlers for the sub-report and make sure that we have a query that can distinguish only those order details that are equal to the order ID. That's basically just a quick overview of what we're about to do next. So we're going to start by creating a parameter query. And the way we do that is we double-click orders data set to call up the order data set in a graphical form, if you will. I'm going to drag this orders over a little bit because I want to expand the size of the order details. Now, what we've got here in a general overview is we've got our order details table. Those are the fields that are in order details. We've got an order details adapter. What we're going to do is we're going to add a parameter query. So the way you do that is right-click on the order details table adapter and click add query. We're going to use SQL statements. We're going to select which rows return. And now what we're going to do is we are going to stipulate the filter, if you will, or the parameter. So we click on Query Builder, and notice here under Order ID, we will click on Filter, and we will put equals at Order ID. The @ sign indicates that it's a parameter. The order ID is the parameter that we created for the sub-report earlier on, and we click OK. Now at this point we get a description of our display of what the SQL statements are going to do. It says select all these fields from the order details table where the order ID is equal to the parameter order ID, and we click next. Shows us that it's about to add how to fill the data table and how to return the data table. We're going to change this again for clarity. The method name is not going to be fill by, it's going to be fill order details. Again, this is for clarity. And get order details. Okay, and we'll click next. And now we've generated all of our select, fill, and get methods. We click finish. Notice that we've got two functions here, one to fill the table and get the data from it. And we've also added a fill order details function. This is our parameter query. That's what we're going to use later on in the process here. Now we want to close the order data set. Just click the close button, say yes, we do want to save that. Now what we're going to do is add the sub-report to the order headers report by opening the order headers report itself. If you don't have it open, just double click on it, it'll come up here. So now what we're going to do is go back to our toolbox, and we're going to add a sub-report. I typically click on sub-report icon here, and then notice that when I go into the master report here, I can drag and drop a sub-report size. Okay, so we're going to right click on that and click on sub-report properties. We'll call this sub-report order details. And now under use this report as a sub-report, we want to make sure that we use the exact same name as is shown in the sub-report that we created, and this is case sensitive. So we want to do order details without the RDLC. Then we want to click on parameters. We want to tell the system that we are expecting a parameter to be passed to this sub-report. So we click add. And at this point in time, we can type in order ID. And going over to the value, we can then click down and get the order ID here. That's how we stipulate that we've got a parameter coming into this report. We click OK, and now we're about to create all of the code that is going to allow us to run this report itself. So let's save the project. And now that we've got the report designed, we've got our order header report and we've got our sub-report under order details, it's time to make the form itself handle all of the programming, if you will, that will help generate this report. So we'll open the designer again, and what we'll do is right-click on the form itself and view the code. Now a couple of things to notice. In all of the things that we changed the report viewer to display first the order master or the order header report, and then we changed it to do the order details report, then we changed it to do the order headers report. We get all of this code up in here. We're really only interested in two of these right now. Most of them are duplicate. So I'm going to delete everything above the line where we fill the orders. Actually, I'm going to go up to this point right here so that we've got the orders done. I'm going to delete that code, and then I'm going to delete everything prior to that so that the only two fill commands that we have are for the order details and the orders themselves. Now we're going to do some rearranging here when we do this, but the first thing we need to do is we need to tell the code that we're some DLLs that we're going to use. So the first thing I do is go up above public class, and we'll type option explicit on. Then we will type imports system Windows forms and imports Microsoft .reporting .winforms. Okay, That's going to help us when we set up our event handler, because that's the next thing that we need to do. Even though the master report is all set up and will populate it, we need to tell Visual Studio how to handle the event that populates the sub-report. So what we'll do is go down past the fill of the orders. We'll press enter to create a new line, and we'll add a handler. It's to me, which is this form, and that is going to be report viewer. That's what we named the report viewer. You can name that report viewer anything you want to if it would help you clarify. I'm keeping all the defaults at this point in time. But that is the name of the report viewer that's on the form. It's a local report. It is for sub-report processing. We'll put a comma and we'll do address of, and now what we're going to do is put in a subroutine name here, not a Visual Studio function. We're going to create a new one. So we'll call this OD for order details, sub report event handler. This can be anything you want it to be, but I did this for sake of clarity. All right. So we'll go down to the end sub there, and we'll create a public, public sub, and we will call this OD sub report event handler. We're going to do by val sender as object, and by val e as sub report processing event args. Not event handler, but event args. That's going to become important to us. Close the parentheses, and now we've got our end sub. First thing we want to do is create a table. So we're going to do dim order tables, order detail rather, details as data table. The next thing we're going to want to do is set a value of the order details. Order details equals me dot, now we put in our data set, orders data set, dot tables, that's a collection of tables. Now, we could do one of two things at this point. We could index it literally, in other words, put in a 0 for the first table in the data set, a 1 for the second table in the data set, and that would appear as either 0 or 1, and that would return the table for that. On this case, we're going to make it a little more explicit, and we're going to call it the same name as in our orders data set here, order details. So we would put that in order details, and the quote, and the parentheses. Next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a filter for that table. So we'll create a string. Well, I call it string filter as string, and now we're going to set the value of that variable to the parameters that are being passed down from the report. So we say str filter equals e, remember that's from up above here, that's our sub report processing events, dot parameters, parentheses, and remember we called the parameter order ID. Okay, we want the values of that, and we want the first value of that. Okay. Next we do me order details table adapter. Okay, order details table adapter, that was created when we created our data set. Now we want to fill that adapter, but we don't want just the standard fill command like this right there. That's our normal fill command. We want the fill order details. Okay, open our parentheses, and what we will do in here is put in me.order dataset orders dataset dot order details, comma, and now we are filtering it by the filter that we just created earlier. Now what that's doing is it is filling the table adapter with the rows that equal the order ID that is being passed in from the header. Click enter. Now we want to add that data source to our report data source. So again, we do e data sources, add, we're going to put new report data source, We want order details. That is the data set that we had in the sub-report, comma, and now we're going to put in the order details table that came from above. So that's order details. Now, if you want to see this a little bit clearer, we could rename this variable right here to TBL order details, TBL order details, at which point this would then become TBL order details, just so that you can see what we're doing here. Order details is the data set. Table order details is the table we populated up above. We are basically finished at this point in time, except that notice that we've got an open parentheses. That's the open parentheses right here. We want to make sure that we close our parentheses. All right. And notice we've got rid of the error down here. Now, at this point in time, we can actually run this report, but I've encountered some problems when I'm doing this that generate errors if you don't first clean the project. So I'm going to go up here to build. I'm going to do clean master detail. I'm going to rebuild master detail, which makes sure that all of our code is correct. And if there was any problems, you would see them down here in this. I can even click build master detail one more time. So let's go ahead and execute the report. We'll go back over here to start debugging, click this, and notice that what's happening now, we've got order number 10248, we've got all our header information, which is the customer ID, that's the date of the order, and then we've got all of the line items, order ID 10248, 10248, 10248, product ID, quantity, price, and we scroll down, there's our next order with only those order IDs in it, next order, and so on like that. We keep going across, we will see multiple pages. In this particular case, it's 5 pages long because we've added all this detail as opposed to the 4 pages we had before. Now, that's how you do a master detail report, where you're passing a parameter from a master report into a detail report. You could actually create a query that would populate customer name, it would populate the order date, you could put in ship date, you could put in ship via, you could go from an employee ID and pull the employee's name off by equating that. So it depends on all your queries on how you populate the upper one. Down here, instead of product ID, you could actually create a query in your data set that retrieved the description from the product table using the product ID. I will leave that for you to explore on your own. Now, one additional thing that we could do here, because notice that in our report, we've got basically multiple orders on the same page. And I've been asked previously, well, how would I put that onto separate pages? It's really quite simple. Let's close this report. And what we'll do is we'll go back to the order headers report. We'll click on the list that we created earlier, okay, this one. Then what we'll do is go down to properties down here. Scroll down and notice then the size right here. Our height is only 2.5 inches. If we were to take that and change that to 8.5 inches and then run the report again, we'll execute, we'll do a save, and then we'll execute the report again. And notice that now what's happened, as soon as it comes up, is that we get one order per page. There's the first one, there's the second one, third one, fourth one, fifth one, so on like that. One order per page. That's how you create a master detail report where you've got order header information, which is a single record, against multiple records in the order details, so you have a one-to-many relationship. I'll go ahead and close that, and thank you all for watching. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you next time.